Hello. Happy Friday. Finally, again, I don't know. It's a lot. It's a lot. So, I've got some stuff to talk with y'all about, but let me get set up here. Turn all of these things on do not disturb because I am notorious for, and it's almost like anytime that I'm trying to do something live on technology, right? And it's also kind of a pet peeve when other people are live, is like, put your phone on do not disturb. Like, you're trying to speak a message and like live stream will freeze if someone tries to call you, and you know someone's going to try to do something and need something from you when you're trying to do something else, right? So I'm going to figure this out real quick. Okay. So, we get going on live here. So, what are we talking about today? We're talking about intention. Intention. Okay. So, with respect to the fact that, you know what, I may not be saying anything new. That maybe you've heard other people talk on intention, maybe you've read books on intention, like, but what is intention? This is more about what intention can mean for you, but it's also what it meant for me, how I interpreted it. But then also, with my profession, and I talk with a lot of different types of people about what does intention look like and how does it manifest for them in their lives. Maybe my experience can give and bring a different perspective on how do you realign with intention and use it to your advantage if you're trying to overcome something, if you're trying to deal with your mental health. And yeah, really like I'll be able to cover probably like a molecule of what intention can be, but then the rest of the time that we have, we'll figure out what it looks like over time. So, but how are y'all doing? Let me know how y'all doing. When whoever watches this video, whoever ends up seeing this live, what is it that you're going through right now? I mean, you don't necessarily have to share in the comments about everything, but like, is this Friday? It's July 21st. Birthday shout outs. My aunt's birthday's today. My friend Rico's birthday's today. My birthday was on Wednesday. How are y'all doing? Like, because there's a lot of shit going on these days. A lot of shit. And you can look at the date as like, oh my gosh, it's almost the end of July. I'd be like, oh my gosh, it's almost the end of July. Like it's one day closer to hopefully less heat. But no, it's been a really interesting week for me. I've had I'm 34 now, and part of what I wanted to, why I chose intention was because every year, ever since I started my health journey and really worked on my mindset and my belief system, I have seen my birthdays very differently. And part of what I had a slogan for my birthday, which is 34 and on to more. 34 and on to more. And I realized that was a form of an intention that I do because it is based off of how I want to align myself in the direction that I want to go in. And last year, my intention at the time, my slogan was the T on 33. And little did I know, I was thinking that was going to be like have this opening, an awakening, which I did, but it's so not what I was expecting. And because the awakening was around something that I had been so used to that I actually had to let it go. And so the T on 33, is going to be ultimately eventually written down and on my book, not going to broadcast it. And, but it gave me so much more insight and experience with things that I had already known. Like, I'm a subject matter expert in dealing and recovering from codependency, and what I had to go through in my life and experience only set me up to 34. So the intention and the slogan that I set for my birthday last year literally just resonated with me on the day that I transitioned out of that year. But it still is, I still got the T on it. I still learned so much. I still learned, it's not even that I learned the lesson, it's that I really had a chance to apply what the lesson had taught me in my earlier years of making sense of like all the patterns and the codependency and the belief systems that I was dealing with as being a product of a generational pattern that I had to break. And I would say I'm mostly successful with it. I'm still going through some of it. But the point being is that bringing intention and what it does for your mental health. One of the first points I want to talk about is like how we use intention, whether it's reactive or proactive. So from working with a lot of people, I've noticed, I think it's just natural is that most of us are reactive. We're in a reactive state, whether that be a reaction to a certain person or a certain circumstance in our life, whether that be an externalized anger and being explosive versus implosivity is still a reaction. That is, we're naturally built to be in a state of reactivity, which is why you hear a lot of people, if you listen to motivational interviews or just talks in general, is that they say that our response to our reaction is the most significant practice and skill. And I agree, but it's not that easy. It takes a lot of practice to practice reacting. Because we're naturally reactive. So when we talk about intention and why being intentional or living with intention, it brings us back the awareness of our lesson, and it brings us more closer over time and practice and application. It brings us closer to that proactive mind state that we can be in, and we're able to get more out of the experiences that we have, all the shitty experiences that we have, being, offended, being, someone told me I was entitled the other day, and they weren't completely wrong, but in the context it was being used, I was like, ooh, no. For someone trying to take something from you that you had no intention of being taken, someone violating your boundaries. Like when you can become more in a proactive situation of intention, then you're able to extract more of the lesson for you to help you process, whether that's going to therapy and having and using a support system to process, or whether that's journaling on your own, or whether that's walking in nature and just mulling it over and expressing yourself. There is a big difference between where we're naturally reactive when it comes to intention. So if you think about it this way, right? If you ever had like a fight or a conflict with someone, and you're having the communication, you're coming back to each other to be like, let's talk about it, let's figure out what happened, and you be like, no, it was intentional to doing that. Like I meant to do that. More than likely, and I'm not necessarily speaking about everyone here, but more than likely you are in a justification of what you did out of a defense mechanism, because you cannot change the past and you can't correct the intention. Maybe you did have an intention to do something and have a certain outcome, but the impact that you had was very different. Then more than likely, because naturally, like as a human, we're not conditioned to look inward automatically and figure out that like, oh, I'm a little embarrassed because that did not go the way that I intended to. The intention that I set did not come to fruition, because at the end of the day, when you set an intention, you still can't control the shit that happens. You can only control what you put out there and how you respond to it. But at first, when you start off being intentional, more than likely, just assume that you're going to be more in a defensive place. You're going to be more in a place of self-preservation to be able to, and you're going to be more in a mode of justifying your actions and your intention setting than you are it's going to be protecting you, because you're just, that's where everyone starts. And I would consider, I spend most of my time with my clients encouraging people not to generalize their thoughts and their behaviors to everyone, because not everyone goes through the same thing. However, when you intentionally generalize, you actually free yourself from the restrictiveness of a generalization that only applies inward. And so what I mean by that is I'm operating out of an intentional generalization that most people don't pay attention to their stress levels at every given second of the day. Because if you did, we wouldn't be in this position right now. I wouldn't be speaking something that resonated with you. But it's natural to be that way. I'm literally built to see outward. I am, and myself, I mean, unless you got, we can have a pair of eyes that goes inward, but it has to be an intentional position change and an intentional acknowledgement that what I'm seeing, what I'm experiencing outwardly right now is not the only perception of what this experience is. Did you catch that? What I'm seeing outwardly is not the only perception of what I'm experiencing. So when you have intentionally, and you adopt intention into your value system, or into, yes, it's really going to be your value system, honestly, that's kind of the only outcome that we're going for, is that you align yourself now with the ability to be like, okay, this is what I intended to put out there. What actually happened? And you go into reflective mode, and you kind of, and so when I go like this versus like this with my hands, I'm really think about it as a swivel seat. So you're positioned here at the driver's seat, and then when you're intentionally reflective, you can turn around and you can move and see something different. And that way you provide a visualization for yourself to be able to consider, there's a completely different experience and reality that I missed because I was so focused on myself and the intention that I had. There now after the fact, we have to consider, okay, what else is there? Because you can't see the future. You can predict the future. You can know probabilities. You can know patterns. You can know likelihoods. But because you can't see the future, you have to go forth and you have to experience and then be able to pause and reflect. Whereas before, like when we're like in justification mode and we're in reactive mode, we're not able to access that ability to pause because it's an ongoing, it's a flowing, it's bleeding out into each moment. And we do not develop the skill to be able to provide that separation between this moment and the next. I see part of why I don't go super into boundaries on these lives is because they're multifaceted concept. But I'll give you this analogy because it's been coming up all week, is that one form of boundary, and the boundary where I'm talking about that separation between reactiveness and proactiveness, is to view a window with a screen on it. So I live in this house right now. I rent in this house that does not have any screens. It bugs the shit out of me because I love fresh air. I love to be, not right now because it's too damn hot, but I love to be able to open the windows when it's cooler, let the air cross flow through. But if there's no screen on the windows, when I open the window, all the freaking outside is coming in. Sara don't do all outside. I don't want everything outside to be coming into my house. That's bugs, that's dust, that's particles, depending on who's mowing their lawn and the wind is blowing, that's grass clippings. I don't want that in my house, right? So if you imagine the boundaries internal of your mind, because boundaries are not walls to keep things out, they need to be filtration systems. They need to be something that provides protection to you, but then also filters the things that are helpful for you through, and keeping out the things that are not helpful, that are not for you. So if you think about, when you're talking about the inability of setting intentions, if you intentionally visualize boundaries and everything that you're exposed to, whether that's the things that people say to you, the energy of the person standing next to you, whether you know them or not, you're exposed to their energy, and you intentionally build a visualization around boundaries in your self-protection system to be a screen versus a wall, then you're able to now, over time, key point, over time, now go into situations that you would be overly exposed to because you have no boundary protecting your brain and protecting your thoughts and your belief system. And you now are able to take away, like, it's not that, if you think about a screen, I'm sorry, I'm looking at the window right now. So I'm like, if you're looking at the window and there's a screen there, it's not that the things that hit the screen go away. Some of those things stick to the screen, but they're not coming in your house. So it's not that you won't be able to feel the negative energy that someone says to you. It's just that you'll have a separation from it bleeding into you. And you can go now to the metaphorical screen in your mind and take those pine straw needles off of your screen, and so you can have a clear they don't block you anymore. You can go and you can wipe off or like dust off the screen or from whatever it is on it, because it's not yours, it's not for you. And that's why I see a lot of people, myself included, because it's a science and an art all at the same time, is that you develop a protection. You develop a screen that is able to filter out what it is that you need, be able to keep the lesson of the intention that you set, and be able to separate you from the things that came along with that intention. But some of them you may need, some of them you may not. So that's kind of the visualization when you're talking about when you're intention setting or you're doing things intentionally, that you can become less reactive and then sit more in the proactive space. So that's pretty much one of the more main fundamental lessons that when I work with people, they kind of have to go through, is that therapy is a co-occurring experience with life as it happens. Life doesn't stop when you come to therapy. Life just is there with you. So you have the ability to form that intellectual boundary, that internal boundary, and that filtration system from what life is handing to you and what you feel like you just have to deal with. And then separate the things that you have to address, because some of the things that you have to address are about you. They are. But that's off the topic today of about intention. So the first point, just to recap, is, are you in a reactive place of intention, or are you in a proactive place of intention? And the differences of what you'll see is that if you're in a reactive place, you're going to end up being more defending your intention from the get-go. You're going to be locked into the intention, like, okay, if I'm in a situation, I intentionally meant to speak up for myself and to advocate for myself, but the outcome came that I ended up hurting someone in the process. If you're in a defensive mode, you're not going to apologize. You're going to defend your intention like, well, that's not what I meant. That's not what I meant. And you're going to become rigid in defending that intention. So what the defense mode, if you think about it this way, is that when you're playing defense, you are offensive. You will offend people. If you're offending people, again, you can choose to whether or not you want to take any of that on, to consider it. But if you don't have that filtration system, then more than likely you're not going to be willing to consider why you offended someone, because you don't have that screen there. You don't have that protective and proactive boundary to be like, you know what, was my intention to offend anyone? No. Someone got offended in the process. Let me figure out whether or not I do have something that I can learn from that. When you have that filtration system and that boundary, you're able to hear the other person and give them and hold space for them, while also gaining insight about like, well, what if I was intentional about saying and doing this thing, and it wasn't the most effective thing the outcome wasn't the most effective thing. Their feedback now has more insight and strategy for you to be even more intentional and impactful in the way that you intended for the next time. Because the patterns are going to repeat themselves and the lessons are going to repeat themselves until you have not only enough time to learn them, to identify them, to experience and apply them. Because that's why these situations that are so frustrating continue to happen. Because the cycle repeats itself, because not only do you have to learn the lesson, you have to see the lesson, you have to understand it, you have to consider a strategy of how you're going to approach it, and then apply the lesson, and then continue to practice it. And this is a lot of times is, when you're dealing with depression or you're dealing with anxiety, mental health just in general, it's so frustrating and exhausting, because more than likely you're in that position is because things have been happening to you and you've had no idea how to get out of them, because your central nervous system is so jacked up from being in reactive families and generational traumas that you don't know actually, you have all the intellect to be able to like, oh, I know what to do. That's why you're good at telling everyone else to do. Hi, welcome to the club. But applying it yourself becomes even more exhausting, because it's still work, because it's still things that you have to do in order to get yourself in a position where you understand and see the lessons that you need to learn and apply it in the way that you need to understand it. So If you're reactive, more than likely you're going to be offending someone. I encourage people to listen to when you offend someone. It's really freaking uncomfortable, not gonna lie. When someone tells you about yourself, I have the luxury, and it's not that I get to tell people about themselves, is that I have to be very mindful of how I introduce that information to people. But it's very difficult because we live in this culture right now. It's like, oh, I'm an authentic version of myself. I'm unapologetically me. Absolutely. But if you are having and not apologizing to other people, you're becoming the problem. Now over apologizing can be problematic too, but if you are just in this place of defending where you're locked into place, you're doing your own damage, and no one else can get you out of it other than you. I can't even change that for people. I've tried and I've lost a lot of time, money, and energy trying to help people understand that we're in a constant state of denial. And if you deny access of information from other people just because don't listen to other people and what they have to say because you offended them and that's not your problem, then you're actually missing out on the literal meat and potatoes of how you get away from those patterns and those cycles to begin with. So getting into a proactive state, how I position this with my clients is looking at it not as a defensiveness, because that's more the reactive side, because we go into defense. And defense, if you like think about the visual of like, and when you hear the word, okay, go on the defense, you're fighting. That's fight or flight, right? Like, so when you're in proactive mode, you are in protective mode. Protection does not mean that you come out swinging. It means that you can observe. It means that you can move. It means that you can shift. It can mean that you're flexible. When you're defensive, you're locked in on one thing and one thing only, and that is self-preservation, not exclusivity and protection. You actually close in the boundary on yourself and you end up suffocating yourself from an emotional sense because you really can't move. You've denied access of everything and in turn yourself to do anything different. So that's the first thing I've had to say about intention with, what does intention setting mean to me is that I had to really look at, am I in a reactive mode of intention setting because I'm justifying what I did? Or now justification and explanation, two different things, but I'm gonna stay focused for a moment. Or am I in a proactive place, which is open with that filtration system of consideration to and control over whether or not what I allow in for my learning, for my application of the lessons, and for my experience of life. So the next thing I really want to say about intention was, so what and how can, I didn't actually read a whole lot of books about intention setting. Literally, the thing that got me started with intention was this journal. If y'all, that's a little too bright with the ring light, but this journal, my stepmom gave me this journal when I graduated grad school. And it sat on my nightstand for almost 2 years, and it went back and forth between my nightstand and my backpack. I used to put my budget in here when I was still writing out my expenses in college because I was living a cheaper life then, so I didn't really need the tools of now that how I budget now. And it literally sat there. I actually keep my budget, if y'all can see this, I keep the first page in there. That light is really, I keep the first page in there as a reminder of when I was living unintentionally, because there was blank space. There was very, what's the word I want to say? They're bullet points, very short, concise points of thinking. And it was specific to my budget. So yes, it's not that expansive, but it could have been more planned out. That when I actually was like, live every day with intention. What could that mean? And that's when I started my profession. I was learning more about where I'm trained in with transactional analysis, cognitive behavioral therapy, and acceptance and commitment therapy. I was learning the importance of aligning with our value system. Acceptance and commitment therapy Google it, you'll find a whole lot of literature. But I wanted to say the fact that you don't have to read a whole lot of books. You don't have to have multiple forms of insight that come to you, because all of these, I mean, if you've heard this, nothing else is that we really truly do these days is original. But what is original is how we present it to each other. What I'm talking about has been written about for years, for decades. One book that I will say, if I actually haven't read it, but I've had a lot of people say, like, oh, you talk a lot about this, and it sounds a lot about John Maxwell, Living with Intention, I believe is the name of the book. But I actually have never read it. And I typically don't like to give recommendations of things that I haven't done myself, but I'm going to do this for the first time, is that read the book and see whether or not it brings you a different perspective of how you can move forward with being intentional, getting out of that reactive place and into the proactive place. I don't know how he explains it, but this is just how I've learned to explain it. And see whether or not you can go from this like very bullet point awareness to multiple lines of insight. Because when I adopted, all my stuff's falling out. When I adopted being intentional, I started expanding my vocabulary. I started expanding my thought process on paper, because in here, it is condensed. It only can fit in between our skull. It's a pretty small space. It's an expansive space, but it is small in comparison to how, we live. And I was able to start to see not only the intentions that I was going for in more of a reactive place, but I was able to be more intentional about being and practicing intention within how I moved and I spoke to myself. I could see the narrative that was tearing me down. It had nothing to do with anyone else. It had everything to do with me. And so when I became more expansive, I filled this up. Now, this actually took me, journaling is a tough practice for a lot of people. But I can tell you, did I do it every day? At some points I did, but I have gaps in some of my, in my journal for like months, because I wasn't at a point where I was aligned with intention, but then things distracted me. Things got me off track. Life experience came into it, and I just got thrown off. And so when you're talking about intention, not only do you have the value of intention, but what is that intention going to bring you? What value is that intention going to have for you is the next point. And if you can identify the value that you want to align with, I'm going to give you an example in my story here in a minute, is then you get so much more. Not only just do you create that filtration system for yourself, because now you're looking for the value within the shitty experiences that come out of, life happening to you. And that's when the switch over to life happening for you really can start to happen once you're consistent with that. And so what do I mean by the value of something? So I'm going to use a story. My brother has no idea that I'm about to talk about him. And if he doesn't like it, then I'll have to end up taking this live down. But when I first started my journey, and I aligned with that intention, I looked at my values, and one of my biggest values that I had and that I wanted to keep, because I had stuff that I had to throw out. Like I valued money at one point versus valuing value. So I identified a couple of my core values, and one of them is relationships. I value the relationships that I have. And in doing so, I was able to take the concept of relationships, and it was multiple aspects that were built into that value. You now have like interactions, connection. That's one of my other values, is connecting with people. And so it's not just like I hold on to relationships because I value relationships, but valuing relationships has allowed me to correct my attachment to relationships and actually rebalance what I need in relationships in order to feel valued. Hopefully you can circle back that again and it makes more sense. But it has allowed me to not only to value it, but to be valued. And that was an immense feeling that I had in my previous relationships, because I was a therapist prior to this whole change. The way that I was doing things, I was doing great work, but I wasn't connected to it. I felt devalued because in my profession, to be honest with you, helping other people, you don't get a lot of thank yous. I don't make millions of dollars being a social worker. But when I switched my values into being and valuing relationships and valuing value, no money can literally, no job can pay me that. I would, in order to stay aligned with my values. Now, point being, let me get back to valuing relationships, right? So the story is, so my brother and I growing up, we were always, it's just me and my brother, he's about 3 years older than me. And ever since he was 17, he has been the soldier. He's been in the Army, I think it was National Guard. So he signed up when he was 17. He is now, so I just turned 34. So he's 37, 30, 38, 37. He's 37. And he has been a soldier for the majority of his life. And that weighed a lot on our family. My mom's only son. And, he basically I've been open about our father passing when I was 16. And when my dad died, my brother went to war. That was his way of coping. And, or at least from my standpoint, is what it looked like. That was his way of coping. And so I was 16 when my dad passed. I was 26 or 27 when I chose to okay, it's time to live intentionally, prioritize my values. So what's that, 10 to 12 years later, did I realize that when I valued relationships, I was able to stop blaming oh, we're not so close. He's off at war. I have to worry. I was so worried about him because I'm my mother's daughter that I was I wanted to just help him all the time. And I was a clinician working with PTSD diagnoses. So I literally just saw the whole veteran population as one big charity case, pretty much, until I learned to value the relationship and I understood that what my brother had been through was not necessarily a trauma that he sees. It was a role and a duty that he provided, and it was part of his purpose. And if you don't value that relationship with a person, you don't give them the autonomy to have their own experience in the relationship, and you just project your own perception of what they went through and what you consider trauma on the situation. And so I would constantly overstep my boundaries and say things that were offensive to him when I only intended to try to help make him feel better, because I was oh, well, are you dealing with this and da-da-da-da? And I was creating a problem within our relationship because I didn't value his side of the relationship. I didn't give him the autonomy to tell me what was actually what he needed from me, because I was just assuming that he was traumatized. And this is an important point for when, if you are a support system for someone going through something, that what you consider traumatic, someone else may not consider traumatic. So as a therapist today, I'm very careful about what I tell people is abusive or what I tell people is traumatic, or what I tell people is an identity that they can attach to, because that may actually be the one thing that brings them down. If they are doing well and seeing that, and the consequences in their life are not caused by that particular thing being a trauma, then if I were to tell them that and convince them that, oh, you've been traumatized, I could be potentially harming them. So that's where I have to really look at, and when I had to value relationships, it can't be on the timeline that I want. If someone doesn't trust me or doesn't have a support system or a rapport within me, then I'm not going to be serving them in the way that they need to be served. So with the relationship with my brother, it really just drove us apart. The more knowledge and education that I got about mental health and about psychology, and I was good at what I did for other people, it hurt the relationships that I had in my personal life, because it didn't create that internal boundary system until I actually started applying what I knew to my own life. The intention of valuing relationships and providing that separation, because the relationship with myself was now not all bleeding into the fact that I was a therapist. It was not all bleeding into the concept of that identity, this knowledge that I have, this skill that I have is not all of who I am. And it naturally started to provide some separation within my relationships that people felt safe to be like, Sarah, I just don't need that from you right now. Or I told them if they ever need something different from me, that sometimes I don't even realize when I'm in therapist mode sometimes. I don't realize that I'm giving more of a, like, some people just need to vent. And I don't have the ability to discern what it is that they need. So now I either tell them that that's what they need to tell me, or they just tell me. And now I have the insight I need to now return and be aligned within my value system of relationships. So what has this given? Now, this has taken time, and everyone's timeline is going to be different. But I told my brother, it was probably, I think, approximately three years ago, within the last 3 years, that this change that I made for my health impacted everyone around me and the relationships that I had. And I told him that I wanted our relationship to improve, but I couldn't do that on my own. I couldn't. I could do a lot on my own. I could swivel in my seat and put myself back in my own lane and keep my mouth shut when really I saw something that maybe he needed to see. But I told him that I want our relationship to improve, and these are the things that I can see that would help me feel like our relationship's solid. Come 3 years later, this man, so 3 years ago, and this meant the world to me, but on my 30th birthday, actually, I guess it's 4 years ago now. It was my 30th birthday. He surprised me. I threw myself a birthday party because at that point, my birthdays had been really, like, I didn't see them. They're just kind of like, oh, it's just another day. I didn't value this whole, like, recognition to what this day was for my life. And he surprised me. And my friends helped coordinate that. And I was so appreciative to the point where he kind of gets a pass for not getting me Christmas presents, not calling, maybe being so focused on his career that I feel a little bit excluded. And that carried over because, I just have to accept that's where he's at, that his profession and his purpose takes him away from being more focused on the relationship that we have all the time, because he's out there being a soldier and fighting for the freedom of this country. Or actually, he corrected me on that the other day, that he is a part of maintaining the freedom that we have in this country because of the innovations and the role that he has there. And I became so much more at peace with wanting more from him because I actually was able to value what I did get from him. And so flash forward to this week is my 34th birthday. It meant a lot for him to be there because this is the first time he's back in a radius. He's only an hour away, whereas he's been 6+ hours away and stationed at different Army camps. And my birthday, I was like, I just want to have a small little thing where I want the people who have really been honest with me, who have prioritized being supportive when they can, I want them to be around me this year. And he drove an hour up and he got me a gift. I was like, who? What? Who's this person? And I was like, it looks like my brother. He sounds like my brother. He pisses me off like my brother. But he's become a very different person in one way, that because I was able to provide him clarity on what was important to me, because I sat back and did the little bit. It was hard work to stay aligned with intention, but he can bring such a different approach to our relationship now, just because, not only because I told him appropriately what it was that I needed, and I gave him time. And in that time, I was able to value our relationship more, to the point where he continuously surprises me to this day. This man, he technically regifted it, but that doesn't matter. He gave me a new tablet. That was so important to me because I go through notebooks like no other, that sometimes having an electronic notebook is way better. And so I tell that story to y'all, hopefully with the prioritization of when you're intentional about your needs, you're intentional about the things that will help protect you and not be defensive, not close everyone else out of your perception, your reality, then you're able to pull way more information out of the intentions that you set and the lessons that you learn. So most of that was I guess the word lecture has come into my mind these days. Probably so. And then someone gave me a suggestion to kind of do like a little brief 2 to 3 minute synopsis of, wow, what did I go over in this 40-minute talk, right? So what did I go over? We're talking about intention. What does intention do for mental health? When you're truly intentional and you understand that you do not have to defend yourself in this world, that you can put your energy towards being protective of yourself, and you can form that intellectual boundary, that screen infiltration system of the insights and perspectives of others, then you go from a reactive place of intention setting, which is justification and rationalization and self-defense mechanisms that you can't control. You go from reactive to proactive with intention setting. That is that switch over to when intention setting actually turns into that manifestation. So if you're struggling, if you're in the manifestation world and you're learning all about like how to manifest all this and it's not working, then you're probably missing some steps to kind of clean out some of the old intention and impact situations that you may have been intentional but more out of a defensive space, and you may not have been able to get into proactive because you've missed some of the really core lessons and applying the small things in your life to be able to actually receive the things that you manifested. So there's a book that you can read that's unfortunately not mine quite yet, but I'm still working towards that. That is written by John C. Maxwell, and I think it's called Intentional Living. If you also want another book, this is going to be by far one of the books that you guys need to start with, is The Road Less Traveled. It's written by a psychiatrist, so there is this combination of science and evidence-based practices with the concept of spirituality and faith. So if you're a religious person, this is a great resource for you to kind of understand the bridge between just praying it away, which doesn't work, and actually understanding the patterns and the psychology behind your faith. And then is really taking a moment to bring a journal and externalizing that narrative, because if you're struggling with applying intention because the impact that you're making is not what you intended it to be, then you have to look at the actual narrative and the intention that you're putting into the intention that you're setting. So those are my 3 tips for how you can really ultimately transform your life. And then really the other thing just that goes with intention is patience. Patience is not only, it's a virtue that naturally some people are given, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's healthy, because if you don't practice it as a skill, you don't practice it with yourself, then you don't always get what you need. You don't get what you need out of it or get what you want out of it. So, and then I will just, remind y'all that one of the biggest intention setting practices that I did in my journey is with these affirmation cards. Now, doesn't have to be this affirmation card, but if you want these, they're in the links in my bio, in my Amazon cart. They're at Target too. This is not usually the deck that I use, the original black deck, but then that's in my car at the moment. So I'm just going to demonstrate to y'all what intention setting can look like in terms of just one practice. It could be meditating every morning. It could be journaling. It could be the intentional, like making sure that you eat breakfast and fuel your body. There's intention setting everywhere, and you can't do a whole lot at once. So just start with one. And these cards were just one representation of intention, alignment, and setting that I did. So until I used to pick one card every morning. When I rolled over in bed, I had them right on my nightstand and right on top of my journal, just to remind me that best practice for me to get out of my head and into my life, and to be able to grow consistency, to grow into this point and where I've been able to transform and be successful with managing my health while managing my business. My business is eventually going to take off because I'm the sole foundation of it. So this practice was part of that. One of my favorite words, compassion. So I choose compassion over criticism. Walking a mile in other people's shoes reminds me they might be going through something tougher than I think. Like their shoes are too tight, or they're kind of shoes that are too casual to be dressy and too dressy to be casual. Basically, I have no idea what they're dealing with privately, so I'll cut them some slack and be thankful for the shoes I've been dealt. And I will carry that into the rest of my day. It's actually, compassion is one of my main values. It's one of the main values of the peace community with Right Size Perspective. So if you're interested in being a part of a community that is not only an experience of learning, but an accountability to practice self-care, mental health, and overall compassion, join the peace community today. I have a bunch of resources and just more access to myself, because you have to make the investment and that's most meaningful and purposeful to you. And I respect that that may not be me. I'm not for everyone and not everyone's for me. So, but if you do want to be a part of that community where compassion is key, compassion that you can align yourself with not going into compassion fatigue, because any good value, if it's not protected, it will fizzle out. It's a resource. But take compassion in your day. For those who are just kind of, oh man, yeah, the webcam is not great. But take compassion into your day and see if you can use it intentionally, because a lot of the times compassion is a protective factor when we're dealing with stress. So thank you guys for tuning in. Make sure you, watch back. Tell me what you guys think. Let me know if you guys have any questions. One person told me, they're like, well, I didn't take notes on this. And I was like, well, just a heads up, you might want to sit here and watch this with a notebook and just see what comes up for you when you listen to just my perspective. That there could be other perspectives in the world that fit better for you. But if you're not sitting there in preparation to actually receive something from talking about intention, then you're potentially going to miss the point. Because skill wise, in order to stay aligned with intention, you have to practice the finite skills. And writing things down is one of them, because your brain acts like a computer, but it's not a computer. It does not have automatic saving of everything. If anything, it cleans out all the unnecessary, quote unquote, unnecessary, invaluable information over time, which is why forgetfulness comes into play. So sit down and listen to this and, play back and write some thoughts and reflect while you're listening to this. And you can also give me some feedback too. Maybe I talk too damn much, which I know I do. But I hope you guys have a great weekend. I hope you guys find a way to align with intention and get proactive in your own life, out of your head and into your life. And I will see y'all next week.